Should Winston have betrayed Julia? When survival is on the line, what is the right choice? Self-preservation? Or the suffering of the other? Or self-sacrifice? And possibly the life of the other? This is a really hard question at the end of 1984, because Winston has been tortured in the Ministry of Love for an extended period of time, and finally he's taken to room 101, a room where he will be tortured with his greatest fear. And it's a pretty gnarly one, right? They fit a mask to his face, and at the other end are hungry, ravenous rats, and they're going to lift a gate and let these rats come at Winston's face and eat through his face. And Winston is just like deathly afraid of rats. And as that's coming down the line at him, the one part of his self that he has not given over to the Ministry of Love at this point is his loyalty to Julia. And at that moment, it says that he wants anything else, one body that he could thrust between himself and the rats. Someone to take his place, begging for someone to step in so that it's not him. And who does he say? Julia. Do it to Julia, not to me, on page 286. Does he make the right choice? Aristotle would say no, because of course it's cowardice, right? He is not exercising the appropriate sort of bravery that goes between rashness and cowardice. He's just full-on cowardice, not sacrificing himself for the other. It's a little bit harder to say what Kant would say, but I think he'd probably say that Winston makes the wrong choice too. Because, of course, again, this sort of categorical imperative that it's always important to treat other people as an end in themselves and not a means to an end. Well, at this point, Julia is no longer a means to end in herself, but she's become a means to Winston's protection. And so on that basis, I think Kant would say Winston does the wrong thing. Mill, again, maybe not quite as clear, but I mean, the greatest good for the greatest number, in a really basic sort of utilitarian way, we might say that it's a total toss-up, right? It's 1 for 1. Julia suffering or Winston suffering. It's a split, so preserve yourself. On the other hand, we might think about larger sort of social patterns, that if it's about preserving myself against the suffering of someone else, if you build a whole society that way, it will ultimately lead to more suffering for more people. And if that's the case, then ultimately it's better to sacrifice the self to have a sort of others-centered society that will, in the end, be for the greatest flourishing for the most people. So I think we could argue that all three of our philosophers from this term would say that Winston makes the wrong choice. And on paper, they're right. But here's the thing. I'm not sure what I would do in that situation. One of the scary things about literature is it puts us in imaginative situations where we realize everything we like to think about ourselves may not be true when the worst moment comes. That's what Winston finds out in this moment. He would have liked to have thought, I'm sure, that he would have been brave enough to not betray Julia no matter what, until he sees the rats coming down the tube ready to gnaw through his cheek to the bone. And then, I don't know. My maternal instinct makes me think that if it was my children, I probably would not say that. But then again, I've never been in that situation. What does it mean to read compassionately when we see someone like Winston make a choice that everything in our heads tells us is wrong, but that when we're being honest with ourselves, we don't know that we can also fault? Because it's survival. And at some point, there's no guarantee that if he doesn't say that, it's not going to happen to Julia anyway, right? There's no guarantee they're going to be treating her well in the next room. Sometimes, can you only look out for yourself at some point because there's no guarantee the world's going to be treating everyone else well anyway? Is that okay? At what point does our own survival take precedence? It's a really hard question. And the end of 1984 forces us to confront it. I do love the moment, though, where Winston says, thought of just another body to stand in the way, to stand in his place. Because as a Christian reader, it also confronts me with the reality of the cross. That at some really deep level, rather than me having to find someone else to sacrifice to the wolves so that I can survive, that God who's watching, the God who sees, as Hagar calls him, the God who has the power to speak creation into existence, that God put his hand up first. I don't have to say, throw someone else, give the rats to someone else, let it be them, not me. Because God already put his hand up and did that for me and said, let it be me, not them. And that's pretty amazing. I've said before in these videos that the answer to the problems that dystopian literature confronts us with isn't a better governmental system or just a better use of power, but I think it's about finding a fundamentally different being on which to ground everything. A being that is grounded, that is the ground of all love. The one who will put up his hand and said, I'll take the rats. Let Winston go. So maybe when you're faced with a really bad situation and it feels like it's your survival that's at stake, no matter how bad it feels, know that there's a God who has already stepped in that way for you and is still there with you. And maybe we don't need to judge other people so harshly when we see them making decisions in those life and death situations that we don't understand because we haven't been there yet. Maybe that's part of what 1984 also teaches us. Is sometimes when we're at the very end of our rope, we find we're not quite the people we thought we are. Maybe we can judge each other with a little bit less harshness if we really imagine ourselves as Winston in Room 101.